Today's guest is MalletLab 2020 digital faculty member, Sasha Berliner. And Sasha is an American award-winning vibraphonist. She's from San Francisco. For the past few years, she's called New York home. In January 2019, she won the Rising Stars Jazz Award that was sponsored by Letter One. And she's pretty much tours all over the world. She's a vibraphonist. She sings, she plays drums, and she's just a consummate musician. And she's also she's an activist too, by my definition. I know she might not agree, but I know that she's made some serious waves in making sure that everyone gets an equitable stake when it comes to their musical careers. So that's appreciated by everyone. So welcome, Sasha. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on MalletLab. We had you in 2018, and you were, obviously a huge hit. Everyone loved having you. We loved your performance at Voltaire, loved your clinic. So it's exciting to have you back for 2020 in this digital MalletLab seminar.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's exciting.
Yeah. So the first question, let's just jump right into it. I mean, we're all dealing with this situation globally. It's kind of connected all of us. We're mostly in quarantine. Things are trying to open back up, and we'll see how that goes. But for you personally, what are you doing to keep your creative spirit alive during this global situation?
Yeah, this is such an important and relevant question. And I definitely have had my moments of losing my creative motivation. And, we frequently operate as artists when we have goals or deadlines or sort of something to at least aim towards. And not having that feels a little bit aimless, or it feels like, oh, how do I focus myself without that sort of external incentive or something like that. So I remembered something that a lot of musicians do, especially like Steve Coleman, and I know Art Blakey did something like this. And I do see quite a few musicians taking times like these to invest in just studying, whether it be they want to take the time to study a new kind of music, a new genre, or music from a particular region of the world, things like that, like sort of taking the time as like an extended sort of study period to really enhance and overall, I think, ultimately change the scope of what they see as music and musical influences. Like it's sort of a major study project. And I've been really interested in that. And so for me, instead of, I guess, taking a certain region of the world or a certain type of music to study, I'm sort of focusing on this more overall like holistic approach where I'm definitely taking the influence of exercise and being outside and being in nature and doing a lot of hikes while I'm here in California, and I guess a lot of meditation and things like that. I've been reading from like Deepak Chopra and a bunch of sort of meditation enlightenment specialists and things like that, and trying to see how that kind of thing deeply influences my music and my presentation on stage, as well as maybe my clinics and how I can better connect with audiences and things like that. It's something I've wanted to work on for a long time. So sort of taking it as an opportunity to be a study project, as well as just practicing and working on my weaknesses. I sort of line out like, oh, maybe 1 hour a day I do, or smaller segments than that. 20 minutes a day I'll do arranging this certain song, or 20 minutes a day I will work on my time, or 20 minutes a day I will, whatever it may be, like sort of setting these parameters in which you're going to work on certain things that it's like establishing your own goalposts in your practice regimen. I think that helps a lot. So reading.
Yeah, totally. Like, and you said something about working on different things. I know I'm, for the first time ever, getting into heavier video editing and how to record and how to mic my instrument better. And that's something that you've always seemed to be very inspirational, at least to me. I love watching you when you post your practice videos and the things you're experimenting with. So what about if you don't have a lot of that stuff? I know you're in LA now, so you may not have access to all of the usual tools and toys and tricks that you usually have. So what are you doing in terms of finding, in addition to the other things that you're doing, these other things you're bringing up, are you finding any time to develop any of your work on any music stuff without some of the things you're used to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in that situation right now where I'm waiting to get my pedals from New York, and I don't have my normal miking situation. I don't have the best lighting or the best video quality. I normally film on like my Nikon camera, and I don't have that, so all I have is my phone. And the other tricky thing is, as I'm sure you know, like miking vibraphone is so tricky. And I got like this little iPhone iRig mic that everyone said, oh, it'll make your audio sound so good when you're streaming out of your phone or when you're videoing out of your phone. But it reacts really severely to the overtones of the vibraphone. So I really can't use it. It's kind of useless. I think it would help, for voice or something like that. But for vibraphone, it doesn't work. So there's a lot of these sort of struggles. And I think for now, I just have to work with what I got until I can get my regular mic set up and my focus right and my interface and everything like that. For now, it's like you kind of just got to make it work on your phone, or I've been able to use a Zoom recorder. You have to make sure to put it far enough away so the volume doesn't spike a bunch, which it kind of does frequently with vibraphone and certain harsh frequencies. But the Zoom recorder and the iPhone has really been what I've been able to use. And I had to film like a 30-minute masterclass, and that was all I had. And it was a challenge for sure, but I was still able to produce something like viewable and usable. So I think there's something for everyone that, we all have a mutual understanding of how difficult this time is, and that, everyone's not going to have amazing resources the best resources to even promote their craft like they might normally. So, all of those things matter. And I think we all take that into consideration when we see a bigger amount of digital footage and things like that. So,
Yeah. And so what do you think is, what are you hoping to, or I should ask it this way in sort of a follow-up, is what are you taking away from this that is going to affect everything really, but in terms of like your career, like how do you think that the things that you're learning through these extra things that you're studying, diving deep into, the hiking and really working on the physicality and your health and things like that, how do you see that affecting your career? Are there any changes that you're going to make after this? Like if all of this goes back to a relative sense of normalcy, are there any sort of, how do you think this is going to affect you and how you look at what you're doing moving forward?
I definitely think that the nature thing has been really influential for me and very important. I think also I have a tendency to get really dark on social media, or it's such an easy way for musicians to compare themselves to other musicians, and you really see the best of everyone's playing, because in social media you can kind of crop out the bad parts or feature the highlights and things like that. So, and you're confronted with every musician who is posting and saying new stuff, and it can be overwhelming. And I remember listening to this Joe Rogan podcast where they were talking about how we are comfortable with food diets and the concept of that, but we don't do the same thing when it comes to information and mental diets. And I think that that's something super important about social media, and sort of limiting our intake of it, especially if we're going to be using it more often, which is kind of a paradox, I guess. But yeah, it's almost like this time sort of reminds us, oh, we really need to get in touch with how we can use social media or data analytics and things like that to target certain audiences and get the most efficient use out of our content, but at the same time, beyond the promoting our own thing and maybe supporting others things. And maybe you go to one or two videos, you share or you comment, give encouraging words, or support other musicians on the scene. Besides that, maybe just take a break from it and keep your maintain your sanity and go for a hike or read a book or something like that. Like, I think those kinds of things have resulted in my more positive days.
Oh,
in
yeah.
quarantine.
Nice.
So it's been big for me. And yeah, I think that's what I would like recommend.
Yeah,
In
I agree with that. I've always found it, and it's the way social media is set up. It rewards you for being addicted. It rewards you for
yeah,
posting constantly. It rewards you for
yeah,
continuing to be on that pinwheel. And so sometimes it's scary because I was doing really good, I remember, and then I stepped away for like a couple days. I just didn't have any. I didn't want to be on it. I didn't want to. And I come back and I post something and it's like 3 likes. Two
yeah.
two people
I
see it,
know.
and you're just like, man, I gotta just be sharing all the time. And so yeah, I definitely hear that. That's really valuable. That's really valuable advice. And one of the challenges that I think I see a lot of is, everyone is looking for an audience and looking for someone to support their stuff, but it feels sometimes that a lot of people aren't supporting or sharing other people's things. And I think what do you think would help that? And I think that's kind of like a microcosm of with gigs. Everyone wants you to go to their show, but they don't want you to go to your show. What do you think would assist with that? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big thing that even I was guilty of. I noticed that I wasn't, being outwardly supportive or commenting on other people's things, or I was busy finishing up school, so that took away a lot of my free time in terms of even seeing other people's shows. But something I've been thinking about a lot is that the act of love and community and activism, anything like these sort of action based um, things, love is an act and
Yeah.
support is an act, and you can't just do it by just sitting around and I don't know, taking it for granted. Like you kind of have to push yourself to be like, I'm going to make sure to make the effort, take time out of my day to support someone else in the community or someone else in the music industry. And I think that's like something that we definitely take for granted and we could really use more of in our current contemporary music industry, because I think it's very easy to be individualistic about it, and we're in this culture of self promotion, self entrepreneurship, and we can get so easily focused on the self that we forget
Yeah.
music is such a collective thing, and it's happens because of others' actions and because of others, yeah, their deliberate effort towards supporting you in
Yeah.
some way. And I think you have to reciprocate that. It's sort of your duty. So I think thinking about the fact that love is an act and you have to consciously remind yourself to make an effort, um, you know, that's definitely helped me a bunch to sort
Yeah.
of contribute more and support more in the industry. And then by virtue of action, you sort of become a better person yourself. It can become second nature. You'll notice that your mood might be better because you've done something good.
Yeah.
Morally, this is something nice that you did for your community. Like it makes you feel good, it makes others feel good. So I think just thinking about that and knowing like it is an effort, it's a conscious, deliberate effort, and you do have to work to make that effort. But
Yeah.
it is worth it, you
Oh,
know.
for sure. I love that point where you said it will help you too. The more you give, like they say, there's better, more happiness and you definitely seems to be, it definitely is the case. And it's just hard in the social media client, climate, like you said, where people are so interested in, we're all about the self promotion. And by sharing that, usually we get back more as well. Like we get the gratitude and then we get our own stuff that ends up being promoted as well, which works out too. So this next question is just really about your journey. Like I've read, and we've spoken about your musical journey, that you were in drums and rock music. I remember in 2018 when you were at MalletLab, like all of a sudden I turned around and you're behind the drums and you were hanging and you were hanging. Yeah, you were really hanging. So I'm just curious at how you went from that and being in rock music and that first album, which by the way I like, your first
No,
album.
wait,
Yeah,
is
I thought it was super. It was
oh,
funky. What were you, 15, 16?
yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And you sang quite a bit on it too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, from that to being, such a heavy in the jazz vibraphone world, I mean, playing with some big cats and just crushing it. So how did that whole journey happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey for sure. I mean, it's funny that you bring up that album because I think it was very much indicative of that point in my life where I was having trouble sort of reconciling the jazz world and the rock world and the R&B world. And at that time, I was really interested in a lot of sort of alternative R&B bands. So like a lot of Esperanza. That was like when Esperanza came out with like Radio Music Society, which I loved at that age. Bands like The Internet, like Frank Ocean, things like that. I was super interested in it at that time, and I knew I didn't want to make a record just playing standards or whatever. So I think that was my logic behind that album, Gold. But I don't feel like it's very representative of where I'm going now and what I want to be known for. So, and also because I was just very young, so I did kind of take that album off of Spotify and Apple Music and
Oh,
everything.
I'm glad I got to listen then.
only the OGs will remember that one.
Nice.
No,
I got the deep cuts. When you're super big time, I'm going to be like, but have you heard the Underground Gold album?
Oh God, yeah. But yeah, another thing was actually that I dealt with quite a lot of anxiety in terms of performing singing. I've
Same.
always had, yeah. So
At least you got through it. I still can't. So.
I guess so, but yeah, I mean, I think that's still a big thing for me. I already don't really love talking in front of huge audiences, like and I know that's sort of like a contradiction to what I do as a performer, as a vibraphonist, and as a band leader. You naturally you have to talk to an audience, but for whatever reason, I still just don't like it. I don't know. I've always preferred like writing and things like that, but I'm getting used to that more, and so I think that played into the whole singing thing. But anyways, a bit of a tangent. I mean, I grew up with a bunch of influences. I definitely grew up with a lot of rock and funk and hip hop when I was growing up, and I really started on jazz when I auditioned for this performing arts high school, and they only offered jazz or classical, and I was really intrigued by jazz, but I didn't really know anything about it. I didn't really grow up listening to it, except for maybe like around the holidays, which is so so typical. But
Right.
yeah, but I was interested in it, and I wanted to study music in school, and I auditioned on the drums, but I didn't really know that much about jazz drumming either. And they already had 7 or so drummers in the program. So really the only way that I got in was that I showed them I knew how to play a couple of major scales.
Right.
So I'd take this glockenspiel and set it up, and then I play like 3 major scales that I know, and then that's how they get the idea that I should play the vibraphone. I didn't know what it was or anything like that, but I started that summer before I went to that school, and I stuck with it. I think I really resonated with it, no pun intended. And it was definitely like a coming of age, and I think that's true about both Gold and Azalea, is that they were both albums very much depicting a coming of age. And when I was coming of age was the same time that I picked up the vibraphone, so I like to think that I sort of grew with the instrument, and I think that's why I had such a personal relationship to it, and why I kept doing it, and it became my main thing. I guess I did play drums in my childhood, but it was these more formative years, I guess, in high school and college that I think really ended up defining who I am now. And I think that does matter. But I also I liked the vibraphone. It was unique. It was special. It doesn't sound like anything else. Like, I mean, and I just felt like I had a need to explore this instrument and play it for the rest of my life. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that I had that feeling with drums quite in the same way. I knew that I loved it, but I didn't know that I could play drums for a living. Like I just, that thought never really popped into my head when I was a kid. I mean, I would have liked the idea, but it seemed really, far-fetched. And once I picked up vibraphone, it felt like more like this is something that I need to do, and it's also something that I feel like this is what I'm going to do. And that was really beautiful. I mean, obviously it's difficult, and you know,
Right, but
you
when you feel that
like
strongly
that.
about it, you're okay with going through the difficulty. You know, if you don't,
Exactly.
right. So if it's like drums, you're like, yeah, this is cool, but then when it gets challenging, you're like, all right, what else is out there? But yeah, I got
Yeah.
chills when you said that about like this is something that I wanted to explore for the rest of my life because I relate heavily to that feeling. Like I like drums. I got some over there, you know, and
Yeah.
I sit down behind them and then I go on and see like Sarah Thar or Sput or any of these cats. I'm like, oh right, that's
Yeah. You're like, oh,
you know.
that's
Right. Like I could see cats who can kill on vibraphone who I celebrate all the time. You know, I see you and Joel and Nathan and Jake Chapman and Chase and all these guys out there, but I never feel like I'm always like, yeah, that's cool. How can I apply some of these things I'm hearing and seeing? But when I see somebody on drums or on piano, which I also kind of play, and they're like on that level, I'm like, that's a
you're
whole,
like, I can't do that.
especially on drums, man. I'm just like, man, they're just thinking in ways that I don't think in, you know.
Yeah.
But man, I appreciate that, and it's just really nice to hear that. And I got it. Your voice, I feel on the instrument, is very unique, you know. And I don't think you have to try. It's very representative of who you are. I think it's equal parts superpowers and delicate. You know what I mean? It's equal parts, you know, honey and scotch. You know, like it's all of those things, which I think is really cool. And I think when you hear people who are sincere with their music, it doesn't have to be like the choppiest but it's them. And that's what, you know, there's joy and there's loss and there's depression and there's anxiety and there's happiness and there's exuberance. And those are the things that as humans we connect with, which is the most important. I think that especially in your last album, which we are going to get to shortly, because I definitely want to get into that right now, actually. um, you know, I think my favorite piece and I think it's my favorite piece because when I hear it, I can see you playing it, you know, and I can hear, it's like you're talking, like you're having a conversation, like it sounds like you, which is Between the World and Me,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is on this new album, Azelea, which just came out a few months ago. It's a
Mm.
beautiful piece of artwork altogether. Manifesto, like I was cooking dinner when I had it on for the first time, and I had to like rewind it because I needed to give it the focus it deserved. And Between the World and Me for me was like, wow, that's Sasha. You know, and of course you have Serentip on there, and you have all these other you have all these great guest artists as well. So, can you talk about it and like what went into this coming of age project as you describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was always thinking about sort of telling a story in sort of scenes throughout my life, and whether it be, you know, a different experience or a different mood or thing that I've personally been through, you know, obviously saying that without words. I mean, maybe, you know, Marigold is an exception and Heroine's Manifesto has speeches in it, but sort of telling these different phases or stories of my life, you know, sonically was sort of the concept behind it. And I definitely wanted something that wasn't straight up jazz, like, or straight up rock or straight up alternative, or something that could easily be categorized. I mean, it's definitely like jazz is what sort of underpins the album, but it's definitely more than that. And I think that's also sort of a summary of my coming of age, because I was influenced by so many different genres and so many different things, that's like something I wanted to articulate. And I wanted to also introduce some of the electronics I do with the vibraphone. So you'll hear like on Spotless Mind on the solo that we were able to use some effects on some of the lines and stuff like that in these really amazing ways that just made me like fall in love with the sort of future of the vibraphone, which is very much, you know, what this next MalletLab is going to be focused on. And I'm super just intrigued by everything that anyone is doing in that sort of digital or electronic realm with the vibraphone. So that was like very central to this album as well. And also the first song was basically a loop that I improvised in the studio, and then I wrote strings to it. So, um, you know, there's definitely an aspect of both spontaneity and also sort of premeditated work. Like, um, I don't know, a lot of the stuff is through composed. San Francisco, the interlude. I mean, I through composed like maybe 90% of that.
Wait, you what?
No,
What is that term?
through composed.
What?
It's to say that I composed all of the notes or the voicings or things like that. You know,
Oh,
there's
gotcha.
it's almost no improvisation. I think Morgan
Oh,
playing
gotcha.
keys,
Gotcha.
that's like some of the improv, but everything's been written out, you know, all the string parts and everything.
Well, I'll tell you what I appreciate about it as well is the fact that to me it's a good album. It's not a good vibraphone album necessarily. It's a good album. You know, it's not like it doesn't feel like someone. And I'm not saying there's anything against this. Someone could be like, "Man, that's a great vibraphone album by a vibraphonist playing on the album, whose name
Yeah.
it is," versus just like, "Hey, man, this is just some great music." You know, like this is just good music that happens to be by a person who plays the vibraphone. And that's one of the things I appreciated about it. It didn't feel like you were punching me in the face with vibraphone lines and, you know, sonically in that space. You know what I mean? Were you thinking about that or?
Yeah, I mean, especially because like the first song is so calm, and then we go into this through composed piece, and then it's like 15 minutes into the album until you hear my first solo. And yeah, it's not super vibraphone centric. I think part of it was what I was hearing, and a lot of it just had to do with a lot of my big influences for musician composers, in which they are not the focus of their own album. I know Brian Blade's done something like this. Esperanza Spalding is a perfect example. I mean, she sings throughout her albums, but you even look at 12 Little Spells, like hardly any bass solos on that. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's really just this through composed masterpiece. Wayne Shorter was huge on, you know, composing several albums that are just focused on composition. He's really not soloing very much or very, you know, showy, flashy lines or anything like that. I don't think he's ever really been about that. But those were like composers who interested me so much, because it didn't feel so like, you know, these are jazz musicians, but it's so much more than that. And so that's always been something I've wanted to depict. But it's also something, you know, that I thought about a lot, and I definitely want to have a more vibraphone focused album for my next thing. I mean, I still want to incorporate all the same concepts, but I'm definitely going to be showing more of my four mallet work and taking a more central role as a vibraphonist on that album. It's definitely something I thought about. So, you know.
Yeah, I feel that. And now I want to ask this, and this is a loaded question, so I'm going to try to narrow the application of the question or the answer. You know, you wrote that piece a while back about some of the challenges that you face as a because of your gender within the music field, education specifically. Some of the comments that you get, you know, one of the ones that stuck out with me was where you were like where you were in a class and the educator, I'm not mentioning names, if they want to read it they can go and read it on your website, I believe, right? But the educator was saying, why can't you play harder? You need harder mallets, you need to play louder, you need to play more forceful. And you're like, I don't think they would have said that or used that language if I was a guy playing this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
it would have been a different perspective. And what I want to ask is, like, it's no secret that you know, being a female in the jazz or music industry, or in general for that matter, playing drums and drumline, marching band, all these applications, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of sexism. There's a lot of preconceived notions. So for us who are in the industry as males or as and who have female students, I have two daughters who are, you know, I'm more hyper aware of it now than I used to be, but who have that, what things can we do or not do, make sure we don't do, to make sure that we are assisting and being allies toward our sisters in this, or any, for that matter, any other type of marginalized community. But we'll stick with girls for now, just to kind of narrow the scope. What can we do to make sure that we are being as inclusive, and not only being inclusive, but going a step beyond it and propping up and supporting our sisters in our percussion and jazz community?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things is something that we already talked about, which is making the deliberate effort to show love and show support. I think, you know, that's already something that we struggle to do in general because of our digital age and things being efficient and so easily and readily available to us, that when we have to make an effort, it feels like weird to us. And, you know, that's the same thing about any sort of marginalized community. Like, you have to make the effort to support them. You can't just it's not enough to just say like, oh, yeah, they're cool, or yeah, they sound awesome, or whatever, you know. Be you know, sharing their videos or commenting and supporting them, advocating for them if you have a position or a voice to do so. um, you know, I think that's like the first step. I think also investigating, say if you're an educator or something like that, oh, what is the makeup of my classroom? How are certain students being approached differently than others? Why is that? What can I do to change that or bring that sort of awareness, especially to young kids? Because I think that's where it all really starts. And um, you know, those are such formative developing years, and a lot of kids are not aware of certain things that they may have taken on in terms of prejudices that they are not aware of, or certain ways they may be approaching certain students differently, things like that. If you just make them aware about it and opening up the discussion in the discourse, if you're in a position to do so, whether, yeah, I mean, as an educator, a teacher, if you have a podcast or something like that, any sort of discussion based thing, any meetings for any awards or, you know, jazz coalitions or things like that, I think are perfect places to open up these discussions. And I know that at any sort of jazz program that I've been a part of, um, that in at least in recent years, that this has been a priority, and this is something that they're talking about. They don't just have, you know, oh, here's our all stars girl jam or whatever, you know. They're also like, okay, what is the actual makeup of this, of our music community? What's happening to girls after they graduate from high school? We see so many young girls are getting discouraged and dropping out of jazz and music in general. You know, like my high school and my college experience have both been really similar in that I often find myself being like the last one standing or one of the only women left in my program. And it didn't start off that way. And it really breaks my heart. And I relate to it because I've felt that way. You know, I've certainly felt like discouraged and like, God, why do I keep pressing on sometimes? And I think if we had these discussions a little more widely, and if we had, you know, these resources and support and just working to actively make the effort to bring people's awareness to things, you know, that it could really change the landscape of that. And I think we are starting to see that it
Yeah.
is starting to change. So I think it's just continuing to do that. And when you have an opportunity to speak, to take advantage of that and make that effort.
Yeah, and I think your voice is really appreciated to that end. You know, I mean, for me, especially just in creating an awareness of the language that I use. You know, if nothing else, just, you know, when you, I can't tell you how many things I had realized I would say that I just came up hearing different music, you know, educational terms that were pretty. I mean, they weren't correct. You know, man up. You know what I mean? Like you know, just terms that you would use like a marching band situation, or play man style, or play as though the other is the negative. You know, things that, like, if you're a girl, you know, or if you just be like, wow, that's, I don't want a man up. I want a woman. You know what I mean? I'm not, it's not like something that would be, so these, like all these little tiny things that if you grew up in a certain era that you would hear as just normal, you know, really have a big effect. And it's a lot that has to do with you and like Girls March and Rachel Taylor, who runs that, and all of these other people who are out there kind of, you know, making inroads into this, that have helped, I know, me be aware of it in my own teaching. And now with my daughter, one of the challenges is sometimes I feel like she plays under her greatness because she doesn't want the scrutiny from her male counterparts sometimes.
I completely know the feeling.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I will take both on this interview and off this interview any advice that you have, or any words that I can help, I can share with her in terms of making sure that she is always living up to all of her potential, be it less than or greater than whoever's around. It's irrelevant as long as she's doing everything she can, you know.
Yeah. Um, this is something I still struggle with. And I think a lot of it is even just residual from my younger years. And if I win an award in something, or if I uh, land a tour, or if I don't know, I get some sort of accolade or something like that, or even if someone just offers some sort of really nice supportive comment, then a lot of times like my default is to downplay it, is to say like that's they're just lying, or I don't know, they're just being nice, or oh maybe they're just supporting me because I'm a woman, like this sort of internalized sexism thing. And also the fact that like as anyone gets more well known or gets further into the music, like you are inevitably going to face people who don't get you, or you can't. I had a friend, a singer, Melanie Charles, who said like not every crowd is gonna rock with you, and that's okay. That happens with every musician you've ever met. And certainly being aware of that, I think, is helpful. And also knowing that music is a journey. It's not like a and it's not always perfect, and it's not always great. If it was, it wouldn't be music. It wouldn't be live music in particular, which is unfiltered, unedited. It is what it is, and that's also part of the beauty of it. And it's also what enables us to do amazing things. Amazing things wouldn't be what they were if we didn't have other things that maybe weren't as good, or that were steps to reaching a better greatness or something like that. But um besides all of that, I mean, I think the worth has to come from yourself ultimately. I think if your worth is if you learn to have your worth be dependent on what other people say all the time, like you're never going to be able to go out, you're never going to be able to
Yeah.
you know deal with things as a musician. I think it's a lot about this sort of building this muscle of self-esteem inside yourself, and knowing that you always have you, and regardless of what anyone says or does. And again, I mean, I think if you're dependent on what someone else says, then your self-esteem is going to be a whole roller coaster. And I think that's true for anyone, but especially for women. Like, if you're gonna let those sort of comments get to you, like you're not gonna be able to push forward. Like, you have to build the muscles of sort of supporting yourself, and you know re-acknowledging or remembering your strengths and your successes and things like that, even if it feels self-indulgent. And just make yourself do it, because there's nothing wrong or nothing self-righteous about reaffirming the things that you've done and the good things that have happened to you, and knowing that those things have emerged out of times in which you didn't feel good about yourself, or yeah, I don't know, you felt like giving up, things like that. And they have emerged despite what certain people have said. And those are all things that I think you have to think about. And yeah, it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
But building this muscle of self-esteem and self-confidence within yourself, knowing that like no matter what happens, my output also doesn't define me as a
Right.
human, and that I'm more than that. And
Right.
I don't know, sort of establishing a larger macro view of yourself, and what makes you a good person, and
Right.
what makes you a human, and
I do feel bad
all of
about
that.
people whose entire identity is wrapped up in their art. Like that's it. You know, there's,
Yeah,
there's that movie by Spike Lee, Mo Better Blues. I don't know if you've ever
yeah,
seen it, but at the end he gets his mouth busted open, and you see the guy kind of go into a downward spiral for who knows for a long time, because that was everything to him. So he didn't know what to. He
yeah,
had messed up relationships, screwed over people, done whatever he had to do for that art. And then when that was gone, he had nothing, and that's a scary world, and that's real things that happens to real people, you know?
yeah. And again, yeah, that's like the same thing where like if something like that happens to you, and then you define your worth based on that event that's happened, or the sort of external output of what happens, the outcome of what happens, despite how much work you put into it, or all of the sort of efforts and things that other people don't see, because your output is different from the work you might have put into it, or surrounding it, or the circumstances and things like that. And sometimes you're the only person who knows that, and it sucks that it works that way, but you know that. And that's the most important thing, is that that, and that regardless, and if you are firm in that and in believing in that, then the other things, I think, start to matter less. But it's definitely, it's a skill to build, and it takes time, and I've had to deliberately work on this skill myself, because I am really good about defining my worth based on what other people make or say of me, or have said of me in the past, and it's so self-destructive. So I feel it, and it is a deliberate effort, but you need to do it if you, I think, for the sake of the future of your success and your work, and being able to keep doing it, your own endurance in the art. You need to do it. You need to love yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate your openness and honesty about that. That's definitely, people who hear, and that's one of the things that endears you to a lot of people too, is that honesty. There's so much fake out there, like you mentioned. To hear, people being able to be open about those types of struggles and challenges allow others to relate and not feel so alone. So definitely appreciated. And finally, just you're on MalletLab. Just really quickly, with all the wonderful and deep content you just shared with us, just really quickly, MalletLab is June 15 to 19. Like, can you just walk us through what some of these your two classes, and you have a performance too, but just kind of what these two classes are going to entail?
Yeah, so the first class, using electronic pedals to enhance the vibraphone, I will basically introduce the method in which I amplify the vibraphone using a pickup system. I'll specifically be talking about the K&K pickups. I know that pickup systems are relatively new. We'll keep developing that. How the inputs work in terms of how to set it up, how to set up a pedal board, or even just a single pedal with the vibraphone. How do you navigate operating the pedals while also operating the sustain pedal on a vibraphone, or if you wanted to control it with your hand, sort of different ways to go about it, as well as how to sort of amplify a live experience and enhance it and make it atmospheric, extend the current abilities of the vibraphone, and expand on them, or
I like that. Extend the current abilities of the vibraphone. I like that better than enhance. I might have to change the title, or at least in the description.
Enhancement. And how to bring pre-existing compositions or works to life using pedals, and how that enables sort of new routes of creativity and new capabilities.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because I know you have great things like the Mallet Station and these controllers, but they don't feel the same as a regular vibraphone, and they never will. So people still want that extra level of enhancement but still getting the feel of the vibraphone, and this is a way that they can be able to do that. And what about reharming jazz standards for solo playing?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a big thing that I do for solo concerts and things like that, because again, I can't just play a jazz standard as it's been done historically, and play all the right, the regular chord changes. Like, I have just a compulsion in me to just mess everything up a little bit. So to say, so so basically I'll go into how I might break down a jazz standard and take pre-existing chords and maybe change them, or change the voice leading, change the harmonic content to sort of channel the emotions or the story that I want to tell, versus the story that the pre-existing composition tells.
I like the way you put that. Changing the harmonic content to tell your story, because that's what it is, right? That's how we speak, and it's like Stefan's always saying, is empathy. Harmony is empathy. So that's really powerful. Well, Sasha, thank you so much. You don't have your vibraphone right there. You want to play something, do you?
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much for hanging out, and for being so open and honest, and being such a valued member of our percussion, vibraphone / jazz / all the other things community. So appreciate you. Yeah, of course. So We'll talk to you. We'll talk to you soon.